Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight we will find old lessons and quiet ideas that light up the path to deep inner quiet and deep resting peace. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a special collection of strong Zen and Buddhist stories, sharing long-kept secrets to clear thinking and calm feelings. Each story carries a changing lesson, capable of shifting how you handle the storm of stress, the sting of anger, the endless loops of thought, and the non-stop drive for more. These are far from ordinary sleep stories. They are carefully saved lessons from wise masters showing a truth most of us have lost sight of. That real peace comes not from changing things outside us, but from changing how we see them. As the great Zen master Dogen once advised, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. Through the course of our listening, you will find exactly how these old truths can reshape your very being. As we journey through these amazing accounts, you will feel an amazing shift begin to happen. The tight grip of worry will gently let go. The constant hum of your thoughts will soften into silence. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a state of deep understanding and calm rest. So sink in deeply now. Allow your body to fully settle into whatever holds you up. Take one slow breath with me, and as you let it out, know that you are about to receive wisdom that has been patiently waiting for you to find it since the beginning of time. Let us explore a story about courage when things are not sure. A young monk was traveling through the mountains to reach a far-off monastery. His simple robes gave little protection against the cold mountain air. As he walked the twisting path, breathing in the thin air and listening to the whisper of wind through pine trees, he felt a deep sense of purpose, guiding his steps toward the ancient place of learning. He was looking for it. When he reached the top of a hill, his heart sank. Before him stretched a deep canyon, its rocky walls disappearing into misty depths below. A bridge had once crossed this gap, but time and weather had taken most of its wooden boards, leaving only a few shaky planks stretching across the empty space. The remaining structure swayed gently in the mountain breeze, looking barely strong enough to hold a bird, much less a person. Other travelers had gathered at the edge, their faces showing worry and anger. Some pointed at the gaps between planks, figuring out if a running jump might carry them across. Others talked about turning back to find another route, though that would mean days of extra travel through hard ground. The talks grew angry as daylight began to fade, and the need to cross grew stronger. The young monk walked up quietly, studying not the bridge, but the faces of the people there. He saw their fear, their math, their mental pictures of disaster. Without joining their talks or announcing what he would do, he simply stepped onto the first plank. The wood creaked under his weight, but held firm. Each step became a meditation. He placed his foot carefully on the center of each board, feeling its strength before moving his full weight. His eyes stayed fixed not on the swirling river far below or the rest of the distance ahead, but on the single plank directly in front of his foot. One step, one breath, one moment of complete attention with what was actually before him. The other travelers fell silent, watching in amazement as the monk moved with careful grace across the dangerous path. He did not rush, driven by fear of falling. He did not stop. Frozen by the size of the crossing, he simply continued, step by careful step, his attention fully absorbed in the real moment of each plank. When he reached the other side, he turned back to the surprised watchers, his face calm and kind. "The bridge is not broken," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "Only incomplete. One must still cross what is there." With a gentle bow, he continued on his way toward the monastery, leaving the others to think about his words and their own fear. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you are facing in the right direction, all you need to do is keep walking. This old teaching shows a deep truth about how we handle uncertainty and limits in our lives. The monk understood that perfect conditions are not needed for moving forward. Life constantly gives us incomplete bridges, situations that are not perfect, but still possible when handled with presence and courage. Why do we so often wait for complete bridges before we're willing to cross? Zen Buddhism points to our mind's habit toward what might be called perfect situation sickness. We become focused on having all conditions right before taking action, waiting for complete sureness before moving forward. This mental habit keeps us trapped on the safe side of our own growth and potential. The deeper teaching here shows us that courage is not the lack of fear, but being present with what is actually before us. The other travelers saw only what was missing from the bridge. The monk saw what was there. This shift in how we see changes everything. Instead of being frozen by gaps and flaws, we can work skillfully with the tools and chances that are available. Think about how often throughout your day you find incomplete bridges. The work project that doesn't have all the information you'd like. The relationship conversation you've been avoiding because you don't know exactly what to say. The creative work you haven't started because conditions aren't perfect. These are all incomplete bridges calling for the monk's way, complete presence with one step at a time. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This seemingly strange statement captures the heart of working with incomplete bridges. We don't wait for perfection to engage with life fully. We bring our whole presence to imperfect situations and discover they are more crossable than our fearful mind suggested. The young monk's practice of keeping his eyes on the plank directly in front of his foot offers deep guidance for modern life. How often do we stumble not because of real blocks, but because we're looking ahead to future hard times or back to past failures instead of paying attention to the step immediately before us? The email we need to send today. The conversation we need to have this afternoon. The simple task that's been waiting for our attention. Buddhist teacher Jack Cornfield reminds us, most of our hard times come from our inability to be present with what is as it is. The incomplete bridge will always look impossible from far away. But approached with careful attention, one plank at a time, it becomes not just crossable, but a chance for building strong trust in our ability to work with whatever life gives. Tonight, as you think about the incomplete bridges in your own life, can you find the first plank that's actually in front of you? Perhaps it's making that phone call you've been putting off, having that hard conversation, or taking the first step toward a goal that seems too big when viewed all at once. The bridge is not broken, only incomplete. As the Buddha taught, a jug fills drop by drop. Every complete journey across life's challenges begins with the willingness to place one foot on the first plank that's available, trusting that presence and careful attention will carry us safely across what at first looked impossible. Our next story shows a deep truth about the nature of learning and being open to spirit. In a far-off monastery known for its huge library and smart scholars, there lived a leader famous throughout the area for his deep understanding of Buddhist teachings. Students travelled from far and wide to sit at his feet and receive lessons in the truth. One autumn morning, a respected scholar arrived at the monastery gates. His fame came before him, for he had spent decades studying the holy books, memorizing countless verses, and arguing the finest points of Buddhist ideas with masters across the land. His robes were fine, his way of standing confident, and his knowledge seemingly without limit. The scholar was granted a meeting with the humble leader, who received him in a simple room looking over the monastery garden. As they sat facing each other on worn cushions, the scholar immediately began to show off his learning. For hours, he quoted from the Lotus Sutra, studied the deeper meanings of the Diamond Sutra, and offered smart explanations of the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths. His words flowed like a rushing river, each sentence carefully built to show his mastery of the rules. He spoke of emptiness and form, of the connection of all things, of the small differences between various schools of Buddhist thought. The leader listened patiently, sometimes nodding, his worn hands resting calmly in his lap. As the afternoon wore on, the scholar's talk grew even more fancy. He argued the finer points of meditation practice, studied the history of Buddhist ideas, and compared the teachings of various masters with scholar-like care. He paused sometimes, expecting praise for his huge knowledge, waiting for the leader to notice his deep understanding. Finally, as the sun began to set and golden light came through the simple paper windows, the scholar paused, sure he had shown his amazing grasp of the truth. The leader smiled gently and reached for a simple clay teacup sitting nearby. Without a word, he picked up a clay pitcher filled with cool water and began to pour. The water flowed steadily into the cup, filling it to the top. But the leader kept pouring. The water spilled over, spilling onto the low wooden table between them, then falling to the floor below. Still, the leader poured, his face calm and focused as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Stop!" the scholar yelled, breaking from his scholar-like calm. "The cup is full. No more will go in." The leader set down the pitcher and looked directly into the scholar's eyes with endless kindness. "Your mind," he said quietly, "is like this cup, so full of what you already know, there is no room for anything new. To truly understand, you must first empty your cup." For the first time in many years, the scholar found himself completely silent, his racing thoughts suddenly still truly listening to something beyond his own huge pile of knowledge. The Buddha once said, "Empty your boat of all the water that has collected in it, so it may travel lightly and quickly." What comes from this story is a basic lesson about the nature of real learning and spiritual growth. True wisdom requires not just the gathering of knowledge, but the growing of what Zen calls beginner's mind, a quality of openness and readiness that allows for fresh understanding. Why do we fill our cups so completely that nothing new can enter? Buddhist psychology finds several patterns that create this spiritual block. First is what might be called knowledge pride, the quiet ego happiness that comes from gathering facts and showing off our understanding. When we become attached to being seen as smart, we secretly fight experiences that might challenge or grow our existing ideas. Second is the mind's habit toward closing. Once we think we understand something, we stop paying attention to it with fresh eyes. We've grouped it, filed it away, and moved on to the next topic. But the Buddha's lessons point to truths that cannot be fully understood through thinking analysis alone. They must be lived, experienced, and discovered anew in each moment. Third is our fear of not knowing. In a world that highly values experts and being sure, admitting we don't know feels scary. Yet Zen practice shows that don't know mind is actually a state of huge openness and possibility. When we think we already know, we stop looking. When we admit we don't know, we become deeply curious and attentive. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." This points to the puzzle of learning. The more sure we become about our understanding, the less ready we are to deeper ideas. The teacup must be emptied regularly to receive fresh water. Think about your own relationship to learning and growth. In what areas of your life might your cup be spilling over? Perhaps in your understanding of relationships, where past experiences have created hard rules about how people act, or in your work, where being an expert might blind you to new ways. Even in spiritual practice, where previous ideas might prevent fresh discoveries, the practice of emptying our cup is not about throwing away everything we've learned, but about holding our knowledge lightly. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, the only reason we don't open our hearts and minds to other people is that they trigger confusion in us that we don't feel brave enough to deal with. Our full cups often protect us from the openness of genuine not knowing. This emptying happens through what Zen calls don't know mind. When we approach familiar situations with real curiosity, when we listen to others without immediately grouping their words through our existing beliefs, when we sit in meditation without trying to reach some previously experienced state. These are all practices of emptying the cup. In conversations, this might mean truly listening instead of waiting for our turn to show our knowledge. In arguments, it might mean staying truly curious about the other person's view rather than defending our side. In daily life, It might mean approaching normal activities with fresh attention, as if meeting them for the first time. Tonight, as you think on your day, can you find moments when your cup was so full, there was no room for new understanding? Perhaps in a conversation where you were thinking about your answer instead of truly hearing what was being shared, or in a hard situation where your ideas prevented you from seeing fresh possibilities. As the Buddha taught, it is better to travel well than to arrive. The journey of learning never ends when we keep beginner's mind. By regularly emptying our cups, we ensure there's always room for the fresh water of wisdom that flows continuously around us, waiting for cups open enough to receive it. Let us now turn to a story about finding beauty within flaws. In a mountain village famous for its pottery, there lived a master maker, whose paints were so perfect that nobles and merchants travelled great distances to buy his work. His pieces were prized throughout the area for their perfect shape, their smooth surfaces that caught light like still water, and their colours that seemed to hold the very spirit of sky and earth within their depths. The potter's workshop was a place of perfect order. Every tool had its place, every skill had been improved through decades of practice, and every piece that came from his oven met the highest standards of technical greatness. His students watched in awe as he shaped clay with hands that seemed to know naturally the perfect thickness for each wall, the ideal curve for each rim. One spring morning, the potter began work on what he saw as his masterpiece, a vase that would show everything he had learned about shape, size, and the mysterious magic of fire and clay. For days he worked, shaping and reshaping until the pot achieved a grace that seemed almost alive. The shape flowed like water frozen in motion, each curve leading naturally to the next, creating a harmony that spoke to something deep in the soul. When the time came for baking, he placed the vase carefully in the center of his oven. Surrounded by other pieces, but given the place of honor, he tended the fire with amazing care, adjusting the heat with careful precision, watching each stage of the baking process as if his life depended on it. Everything went perfectly. But when he opened the oven after the cooling period, his heart stopped. There, across the vase's otherwise perfect surface, ran a tiny crack, barely visible, yet surely there. It traced a delicate path from the neck toward the base, like a whispered mistake in an otherwise perfect song. His students, seeing the master's look of sadness, quickly moved to remove the piece and add it to the pile of seconds that would be sold cheaply in the village market, or perhaps broken down and reused into new clay. "No," the potter said quietly, his voice carrying a surprised gentleness. "This one stays." To everyone's surprise, he carried the vase not to the storage room, but to his personal rooms, placing it on a special shelf among his most treasured possessions. For weeks afterward, visitors would often find him sitting quietly before the vase, studying it with a look that seemed part thinking, part wonder. One afternoon, a rich collector known throughout the area for his good eye and huge collection arrived at the workshop. He looked at many pieces with professional joy, praising their technical greatness and artistic worth, but repeatedly his attention returned to the flawed vase on the potter's personal shelf. Finally, unable to hold his curiosity, he pointed to it. "That piece," he said, his voice filled with real wonder, "is truly amazing. The crack, though certainly there, somehow highlights the strength and beauty of the shape itself. It's like a lightning bolt showing the mountain's core, or a river defining the land through which it flows. It speaks of strength, of beauty that includes the unexpected. It whispers stories of the journey through fire." The potter smiled, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. He had already learned what the collector was just discovering. That true art wasn't found only in avoiding mistakes, but in seeing how those mistakes could show deeper truths about the beauty and strength found in all created things. As the Buddha said, there is no lotus without mud. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that imperfection is not the enemy of beauty, but often its most deep teacher. The crack in the vase showed something that perfect smoothness could never show. the tension and strength needed to hold together under pressure, the story of change through fire, the delicate balance between breaking and lasting that defines all life. Why do we struggle so hard with our own cracks and flaws? Buddhist teaching points to our deep training around what makes value and worth. From early childhood, we learn to link love and acceptance with meeting certain standards, with being good enough according to outside measures. This creates what Zen calls perfectionist mind, a non-stop inside judge that sees any difference from an imagined ideal as failure. This perfectionist training causes us to hide our cracks rather than see them as part of our unique beauty. We develop complex plans to appear perfect, spending huge energy keeping up masks of skill, happiness, or spiritual success. But these efforts often push us away from the very connections and real experiences we truly seek. The Japanese art rule of wabi-sabi teaches us to find beauty in things that don't last, are not perfect, and are not finished. In this worldview, the crack in the potter's vase doesn't lower its beauty. It completes it. It tells the story of its creation, shows its humanity, and invites us to enjoy it not despite its flaw, but because of how that flaw adds to its unique character. Think about your own relationship with your perceived flaws. Perhaps it's the way your voice cracks when you're nervous, which actually makes others feel more at ease with their own feelings, or the scar that tells the story of an adventure or accident that shaped who you became. These apparent flaws often become the very qualities that others find most sweet and real about us. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck taught, "We are all perfect as we are, and we could all use a little improvement." This puzzle captures the heart of working skillfully with our flaws. We don't need to be fixed or completed to be worthy of love and acceptance. Yet this acceptance doesn't prevent us from growing and learning. The crack also stands for strength, the ability to continue working and even doing well despite damage or stress. When we try to appear perfect, we often become brittle, afraid that any challenge will break our carefully built image. But when we admit our cracks openly, we develop a different kind of strength, the flexibility to bend without breaking, the realness that comes from self-acceptance. In relationships, showing our cracks often deepens connection rather than weakening it. When we let others see our struggles, our doubts, our learning edges, we invite them to be equally real. The cracks become doorways for true closeness and mutual support. Buddhist practice encourages us to look at our dislike of imperfection with gentle curiosity. What stories do we tell ourselves about what we need to be in order to be accepted? How much energy do we spend trying to hide our natural human limits? What might become possible if we brought the potter's happy awareness to our own beautiful cracks? Tonight, as you notice the places where you feel imperfect or flawed, can you look at them with the collector's wise eye? Perhaps that habit toward worry shows your deep care for others' needs. Maybe that quick temper shows your strong belief in fairness. These cracks don't lower your worth. They tell the story of your unique journey through the fires of experience. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 empty words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes that one word is simply enough. The knowing that we are already complete, cracks and all, already worthy of love, already beautiful in our imperfect humanity. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the uselessness of constant struggle against the natural way. In a mountain monastery famous for its beautifully kept gardens, there lived a monk whose love for beauty and order was famous. Every morning before dawn, he would begin his work among the carefully kept beds of flowers and vegetables, the exactly raked gravel paths, and the carefully cut trees that had been shaped by generations of careful hands. His garden was a wonder of harmony and balance. Each plant grew well in its chosen place. Every pathway was swept clean of the smallest dirt, and the patterns he raked into the gravel seemed to capture the very spirit of flowing water and wind. Visitors often said that walking through his garden felt like entering a world where chaos had never existed, where everything existed in perfect agreement with human plans. One morning in early spring, As the monk finished his dawn meditation and prepared to begin his daily gardening routine, he discovered something that stopped him in his tracks. In the center of the main courtyard, breaking through the carefully kept area of raked gravel, a small green shoot had come up overnight. It was clearly a weed. Not one of the plants he had carefully chosen and placed, but something wild and uninvited. The monk frowned, bothered by this break in his perfect order. He knelt down and carefully pulled the weed roots and all, then smoothed the gravel back into its perfect patterns. But the next morning, the weed had returned, coming up in the exact same spot as if it had never been touched. Day after day, the same habit repeated. The monk would remove the weed with increasing care, digging deeper to ensure he had captured every trace of root, treating the soil to prevent regrowth, even replacing the gravel entirely. But each morning brought the same small green fight against his efforts. The monk tried every trick he knew. He poured boiling water on the spot. He covered it with stones. He planted other plants nearby to crowd out the unwanted growth. Nothing worked. The weed returned with what seemed like increasing strength, as if each attempt to destroy it only strengthened its will to exist. As weeks passed, the monk found himself thinking about this single weed constantly. His attention, once spread evenly across the entire garden, became fixed on this one small flaw. He would wake in the night, wondering if it had come up again. His meditation became upset as he planned new ways for its removal. Finally, in anger and confusion, he sought advice from the monastery's leader. The older monk listened patiently to the gardener's story of struggle, nodding with understanding and gentle humor. When the story was complete, the leader smiled. Perhaps he suggested with typical gentleness, "The weed is not an enemy to be beaten, but a teacher to be welcomed. Consider what it shows: strength, an unshakable promise to life, and the ultimate uselessness of fighting against the basic nature of existence. Instead of battling this small teacher, why not tend to the rest of your garden and let the weed remind you that even in our most carefully ordered lives, there is always something wild and free." From that day forward, the monk's relationship with his garden changed completely. He continued to tend his plants with love and attention, but he stopped fighting the stubborn weed. Instead, he began to watch its cycle of growth with curiosity and even happiness. In doing so, he discovered a strange and unexpected peace. The relief that comes from giving up an unwinnable battle. Buddha's wisdom tells us, pain is certain, suffering is optional. This ancient teaching shows us that the gardener's suffering came not from the weed itself, but from his fighting its existence. The weed simply was growing according to its nature, answering to sunlight and water, following the strong push toward life that moves through all things. The suffering came from the monk's demand that reality should be different than it was. Why do we tire ourselves fighting unwinnable battles? Zen Buddhism points to our deep training around control and our resistance to accepting what is beyond our power. The mind creates a trick that we can manage all parts of our experience if we just try hard enough, plan carefully enough, or fight long enough. This leads to what might be called gardener sickness, the belief that life should follow our careful designs. But existence includes forces beyond our control. There will always be weeds in our carefully kept gardens. The difficult coworker who triggers our anger, the body limit that holds back our plans, the emotional pattern that comes back despite our efforts to beat it. These constant challenges are not signs of our failure, but invites to develop a different relationship with what we cannot change. The deeper wisdom here shows itself when we recognize that our energy is limited and precious. Every moment spent fighting unchangeable conditions is energy not available for helping what can actually grow and bloom under our care. The monk could have put his angry efforts toward growing more beauty in other parts of the garden, but his focus on the one weed prevented him from seeing these chances. Think about the stubborn weeds in your own life. Perhaps it's a family member whose actions consistently trigger your anger despite your repeated efforts to change them, or a body condition that requires ongoing care rather than cure. Maybe it's a part of your personality that you've tried for years to remove, but that keeps returning in various forms. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This seeming opposite points to the middle way between giving up and useless struggle. We continue to tend our gardens with care and plan, but we hold our efforts lightly, recognizing that perfect control is neither possible nor necessary for a meaningful life. The leader's suggestion to let the weed remind you changes the stubborn problem from an enemy into a teacher. That difficult person becomes a mirror showing our attachment to having things our way. The recurring challenge becomes a practice ground for growing patience and acceptance. The limit becomes a line that helps us value what is actually within our power. This doesn't mean becoming lazy or leaving all effort to create positive change. The monk continued to tend his garden with dedication and skill, but he stopped tiring himself in useless battles and found peace in accepting the mix of order and wildness that marks all of life. Buddhist practice includes what's called skillful effort, learning to tell between the changes we can effect and those we cannot. This knowing prevents us from wasting precious energy on unwinnable fights, while ensuring we don't drop responsibility for what is truly within our power to change. Tonight, as you consider the stubborn weeds in your own carefully kept life, can you find which battles might be using energy that could be better directed elsewhere? What if you stopped fighting that one recurring challenge and instead let it teach you about strength, acceptance, and the wild nature that exists alongside all human attempts at perfect order? As the Buddha taught, hatred is never calmed by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred calmed. This is a law forever. Sometimes the most bold act is not to fight our stubborn weeds, but to let them grow while we tend to the rest of our garden with renewed happiness and joy. Let us continue on our journey with a tale about the true nature of happiness and the difference between looking and finding. By a gently flowing river that wound through hills covered in bamboo and willow trees, there lived an old fisherman known throughout the valley for his wisdom and calm. Every morning, as the mist rose from the water and the first light touched the mountains, he would carry his simple bamboo rod to the same quiet spot along the riverbank. The old man had fished these waters for more years than anyone could remember. His worn hands moved with practiced grace as he prepared his line, picked his bait, and cast into the slow-moving current. But those who watched him closely noticed something unusual about his fishing practice. He rarely seemed to catch anything. Yet his happiness appeared deeper than that of fishermen who returned home with heavy baskets. One bright morning, a young fisherman who had heard stories about the old master decided to seek him out. This younger man was driven and skilled, known for his ability to read the water and locate the best fishing spots. He had studied the eating habits of different fish, bought the finest gear, and approached fishing with the focus of someone determined to succeed. The young fisherman found the old man sitting peacefully by the water, his line cast into a part of the river that appeared to hold no special promise. For hours, the younger man watched, growing increasingly puzzled. The old master's method seemed okay, but not special. His gear was simple, almost old-fashioned by modern standards. Most confusing of all, fish sometimes approached his bait, but he seemed almost like he didn't care whether they took it or not. As the sun climbed higher, and still the old man had caught nothing, the young fisherman could hold his curiosity no longer. Walking up respectfully, he bowed and said, "Honored elder, I have watched you for many hours. Your catches appear to be few, yet you fish with such care and seem so peaceful. I have come seeking to learn from your wisdom. What is the secret of your way?" The old fisherman's eyes twinkled with gentle fun as he motioned for the young man to sit beside him on the smooth rocks that lined the shore. For a long moment, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the soft sound of water over stones and the far-off call of birds in the trees. "My young friend," the old man finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet power of deep experience. "You ask about my secret, But perhaps you are looking in the wrong direction. My secret lies not in the fish I catch, but in the net I do not see. The young fisherman looked confused, looking around for some hidden net or gear he had missed. The old man smiled and continued. Every cast, every moment of waiting, every breath taken beside this flowing water is an act of complete presence. The fish are merely a bonus, a gift when they choose to offer themselves. The true catch is the quiet mind, the rhythm of the water moving through my awareness, and the understanding that even when my basket stays empty, something deep is always being received. He paused, watching as his line drifted gently downstream. You see, I have learned that there are two kinds of fishing. One seeks to catch something outside ourselves to fill an inner emptiness. The other discovers that the fullness we seek has been present all along, waiting not to be caught, but to be noticed. The young fisherman sat in thoughtful silence, beginning to understand that he had come seeking technical knowledge, but was receiving something far more valuable, a completely different understanding of what it means to find what we're truly looking for. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This tale shows a deep truth about the nature of seeking and happiness. The old fisherman had discovered that what we're ultimately looking for is not outside ourselves waiting to be caught, but is the very awareness with which we approach our seeking. Why do we tire ourselves chasing outside winds and things when deeper satisfaction remains hard to find? Buddhist psychology explains that we've been trained to believe that happiness comes from getting something we don't currently have. This creates what Zen calls hungry ghost mind, a state of constant wanting that can never be satisfied because it's based on a basic misunderstanding about the nature of peace. The young fisherman represents our usual approach to life, goal-oriented, results-focused, always measuring success by what we manage to catch or achieve. While this approach can certainly bring practical results, it often leaves us feeling empty despite our wins. We catch the fish but miss the deeper food available in the process itself. The invisible net the old fisherman speaks of represents the field of awareness that surrounds and goes through every experience. When we learn to fish with this net, we discover that happiness is not dependent on results, but comes from the quality of presence we bring to whatever we're doing. The rhythm of casting becomes a meditation. The waiting becomes a chance for stillness. Even the fish that escape become teachers about letting go. Think about your own relationship with seeking and achieving. How often do you put off happiness until you reach the next goal, get the next thing, or solve the next problem? This pattern keeps us always in the future, missing the richness available in the present moment. The old fisherman had learned to find happiness in the doing rather than the result. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. This points to the same understanding the fisherman shows. We don't fish in order to be happy when we catch something. We fish happily, allowing the activity itself to be complete, regardless of outside results. This doesn't mean dropping all goals or efforts. The old man still cast his line, still used proper skill, still hoped for fish, but he held these activities lightly, without the desperate grabbing that turns every chase into a source of suffering. He had learned what Buddhist teaching calls skillful action, engaging fully while remaining free from specific results. The invisible net also represents the connected web of relationships and experiences that supports us at every moment. The warmth of sunlight, the sound of flowing water, the breath moving through our body, the very power for awareness itself. These gifts are constantly being offered, but we miss them when we're fixed on catching something else. Buddhist practice grows this recognition through mindfulness meditation. As we learn to pay attention to present moment experience without constantly trying to change or improve it, we discover the plenty that's always available. The breath becomes as interesting as any outside win. The simple act of sitting becomes as fulfilling as any new thing. This understanding changes our relationship with work, relationships, and all our daily activities. Instead of rushing through experiences to get to some imagined better future, we learn to live in them fully. The drive to work becomes a chance for awareness, rather than just time to get through. The difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice presence rather than just a block to overcome. Tonight, as you think on your own seeking and working, can you find the invisible net that's always available to you? Perhaps it's the steady rhythm of your breathing, the feeling of being held by the chair or bed beneath you, or simply the miracle of awareness itself watching this moment. These gifts require no effort to receive, no achievement to earn. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The old fisherman had discovered this inner peace that doesn't depend on outside conditions. By learning to fish with presence rather than desperation, with thanks rather than grabbing, he had found the true catch that satisfies completely, the knowing that we already have everything we need for deep peace. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story shows the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a far-off monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated students who had taken strict promises as part of their spiritual training, including a promise to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual development. As they approached a high river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they met a young woman standing uncertainly at the water's edge. The current was strong and dangerous, filled with trash from the mountain rain, and she was clearly afraid to try crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them, "could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their strict rules and the possible problems of this situation. Physical contact with women was strictly not allowed, and he began making up explanations for why they couldn't help. Perhaps suggestions for other solutions that wouldn't require breaking their promises. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's problem and the real danger she faced and made a different choice. Without waiting or long thinking, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the dangerous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said thankfully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks started their journey again, but the feeling between them had changed greatly. The first monk walked in, growing upset silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had seen. As the hours passed, his inside tension grew until finally he could no longer hold his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer. "I cannot understand your actions back at the river. Our spiritual training clearly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so clearly break our sacred promises?" His friend looked at him with gentle surprise and answered with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her. Buddha's wisdom teaches us holding on to anger is like grabbing a hot coal with the plan of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." This tale shows the deep difference between kind action and mental holding on, between answering to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, playing over scenes and holding grudges that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism shows that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to let go of experiences once they've passed. The first monk's upset shows how strict following of rules can sometimes conflict with the kind spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and responded with immediate kindness, then completely let go of the event. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own habit to replay past conversations, nurse old hurts, or mentally practice scenes that have already ended. How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than dramatic breaking of rules. We carry mean words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with chance and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to tell between appropriate action and unnecessary holding on. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the event endlessly in his mind. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to change, everything is possible." The river crossing was changing. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monks holding to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax right now and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural life. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old anger, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The funny thing is deep. The monk who actually broke the rule felt no suffering from it, while the monk who kept perfect rule following created hours of upset for himself. This shows that suffering often comes not from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old hurts, or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the weight of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. Our next story shows a deep teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grabbing what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden, where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Seiyo sat with one of his most serious students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist ideas for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the trick of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seemed so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could say lines about emptiness, talk about the deep meanings of non-being, and engage in long arguments about the relationship between form and void. But for all his book understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, ideas floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been bothering him for months. "Master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully, "I have studied the teaching of emptiness a lot. I understand that all things come and go away, that nothing has permanent separate existence. But I feel like I'm only grabbing ideas. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself?" Seiyo looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before, the gap between book understanding and direct knowing, the frustration of trying to grab with the mind what can only be known through experience. "Show me how you would get hold of emptiness," the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to catch something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though holding a soap bubble that might pop at any moment. His face was serious and focused. His entire being focused on this attempt to show his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. "There," he said, holding his cupped hands very still. "I'm trying to hold emptiness itself." Seiyo looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. "That's not very good," he said with a slight smile. "You haven't got anything in there at all. You're just holding air and calling it something special." The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his action caught something meaningful about the teaching. "Well, master," he said, his voice touched with sadness and confusion, "please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness?" Without warning, Master Seiyo reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm pull. "Ouch!" the monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden, unexpected pain. "Master, that hurt me." Seiyo let go of his grip and smiled broadly. "Now that he said with happiness is how you get hold of emptiness." The monk stood there rubbing his nose, completely confused. His nose throbbed with very real, very unempty pain. How could this undeniable presence of pain have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the first shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real, yet it was also completely passing, already beginning to fade. It had come from nowhere, would disappear completely, and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely not solid. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp feeling, all his thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no deep analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct, immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had melted in the simple reality of ouch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the lack of experience, but the very nature of all experience. Everything comes, exists for a moment, and goes away, leaving no permanent trace while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness with ideas when it's the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grab reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into hard ideas, then wonder why they feel distant and just like theory. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be caught and owned. But emptiness isn't an object. It's the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It's not something we can grab. It's what makes grabbing possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts coming in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The feelings in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words, all of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It's alive, answering, creative, the very power for experience itself. When Seiyo pulled his student's nose, he wasn't showing the lack of feeling, but the amazing way feeling appears from nowhere, exists clearly, and melts back into nowhere. All within the open emptiness of awareness. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his ideas about experience. The master's action brought him back to the now of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of deep analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly meet this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we're caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally goes down? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual stuff when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self. Isn't it actually more like a flowing process? A river that appears to be the same while constantly changing? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are changing. Work out your freedom with hard work." This isn't a deep statement, but a direct pointing to what's happening right now. Everything we experience is empty in the sense that it has no permanent separate existence. Yet, It's all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, feelings, and experiences coming and going in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Seyo was pointing to? Not as a hard concept, but as the very space in which your life is happening. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature? Buddha's wisdom reminds us in the sky there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all things isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It's what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grab it and let ourselves be grabbed by it instead. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of peace. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a tired traveller met a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an unsure sky that could promise either gentle rain or hot heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth rock, watching his sheep eat happily among wild grasses. His face bore the calm look of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his way, a quality of unshakable calm that drew the traveller's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveller called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clearness and smiled with real warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he answered simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveller paused, confused. He had expected a useful forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like a confusing answer, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" The traveller pressed, his voice carrying upset mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile grew deeper, and he motioned toward the huge sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most important lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get. So, I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveller stood in silence, the deep simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding good ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather forecasts in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the worry of not knowing. As the Buddha saw, holding on is the root of suffering. What comes from this story is the recognition that true peace comes not from controlling outside conditions, but from changing our relationship to whatever conditions arise. Why do we tire ourselves trying to arrange life according to our wants, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life gives? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance. Not giving up, but the deep wisdom that recognizes fighting against reality as the main source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an inside war that drains our energy and blocks our power for peace. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it happens, we discover the huge peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Think about how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day fighting conditions beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't act as we think they should. Each fight creates a small tightening in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that adds up into constant unhappiness. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming lazy or ceasing to have likes. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our likes lightly rather than allowing them to determine our peace. Zen Master Senkan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest removing all wants, but rather not allowing those wants to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of fighting back. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing conditions were different, or believing you'll be happy when things change. This tension is optional. Not because you should push down your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that holding on doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on outside circumstances, arranging themselves according to our wants. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his basic peace doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and hard, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if peace isn't waiting for better conditions, but is available right now through a shift in how we see? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life follow our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the puzzle of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a famous Zen master whose students achieved deep understanding through hard practice. Filled with spiritual drive and eager to change his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to reach enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with excitement, he immediately sought a meeting with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room looking over a garden where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with total hard work and unshakable effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his standing. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely with the right approach, the process could be faster. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more books, practice more intensely? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing anger. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his promise. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I give every waking moment to practice sleep only when absolutely necessary and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then, I could achieve understanding much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied, without waiting. By now the student was completely confused and increasingly upset. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, fighting arts, school, harder work, produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his sadness and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's look became gentle and kind, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What comes from this story is a deep teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the puzzle of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal focus actually slow our spiritual growth? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that too much focus on winning creates blocks to understanding. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our mind is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined place, we cannot fully live in the present moment practices that actually grow awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to play for people, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, beat, and tone that grows skill. The music comes through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between player and instrument, not through anxious guessing toward future skill. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the quiet grabbing that turns spiritual practice into a trade. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study books to gather wisdom, or grow kindness to become better people, we're approaching the path as shoppers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a basic split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This deep teaching points to the very heart of the Master's lesson. Zen is not something we get, but something we recognize. It's not a place we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom shows why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're wildly chasing enlightenment, we're operating from the idea that our present experience is somehow not good enough or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most deep insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without plan. These moments of natural awareness show what the Master was pointing toward. That wisdom comes when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen Master Huangpo taught your everyday mind that is the way. This teaching invites us to look at our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's mistake wasn't his desire for understanding, but his idea that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he suggested working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to run away. In Zen practice, we grow what's called just sitting, meditation without gaining mind, without plan, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become lazy or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to come naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Think about how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing ideas typically produces stiff results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined places, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about true spiritual power. This is the tale of the miracle of ordinary living. At Ryuman Temple, the famous Zen master Bankei was sharing the truth with a large gathering of devoted students. The hall was filled with people sitting in quiet attention, absorbing his simple yet deep teachings about living with natural awareness. The evening light filtered through the temple windows, creating a feeling of peace and thinking. In the middle of his talk, a disturbance arose near the back of the hall. A Shinshu priest, whose own temple had been losing followers to Bankei's growing fame, pushed his way through the crowd with obvious upset. His face was red with jealousy, and his movements were sharp with competitive energy. Bankei paused his teaching and looked toward the noise with patient curiosity. "What is this noise that stops our evening together?" he asked gently, his voice carrying no anger despite the stop. The priest stood up boldly, his voice rising above the whisper of the crowd. "The founder of our group," he bragged loudly, had such magic powers that he held a brush in his hand on one bank of the river. His helper held up a paper on the other bank, and the teacher wrote the holy name of Amida through the air. Can you do such a wonderful thing? The gathered students turned their attention between the challenging priest and their teacher, curious how Bankei would answer to this test of his spiritual abilities. Some expected a show of magic powers. Others wondered if their master would engage in argument. Bankei smiled with the gentle fun of someone who understood the priest's confusion completely. "Perhaps your fox can perform that trick," he replied lightly. "But that is not the way of Zen. My miracle is that when I feel hungry, I eat, and when I feel thirsty, I drink." The temple fell into deep silence as the simple depth of these words settled into the hearts of those present. The priest, expecting magical shows, found himself face to face with a teaching about the special nature of ordinary experience. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom shows how real spiritual power shows not in magic demonstrations, but in complete presence to what is actually happening. Why do we seek the magic outside of our immediate experience? Zen Buddhism shows our habit to bypass the deep simplicity of life in search of big spiritual experiences. We imagine enlightenment as something exotic, magical, or removed from daily existence, when in truth, it's the power to be fully present to whatever is arising. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that mind itself is the ultimate miracle. The fact that you can taste food, feel thirst, hear these words, or experience any feeling at all is more special than any magic trick. Yet, we take these everyday miracles for granted while seeking special powers that would somehow prove our spiritual growth. Look deeply at your own experience right now. Can you feel the miracle of breathing without having to think about it? The wonder of your heart beating steadily? The amazing fact that light enters your eyes and somehow becomes the picture of these words? These are the real miracles available in every moment. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This puzzle points to the Zen understanding that we don't need to become someone special to access spiritual truth. We need to fully live who we already are. The Buddha taught, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. The path is not about growing magic abilities, but about going all the way into the simple reality of this moment, starting exactly where you are with whatever you're experiencing right now. Consider how the priest's question showed his own spiritual greed, the belief that wisdom can be measured by impressive shows rather than by the quality of one's presence. This trap catches many seekers who mistake the special for the spiritual, when the truly spiritual is found in bringing complete attention to the ordinary. Tonight, as you eat your next meal or drink a glass of water, can you taste the miracle that Bankei pointed to? Can you experience the wonder of simple body processes that keep your life going? As the Buddha said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The miracles we seek are not above us, but within the simple reality of being alive. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the future we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that showed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The land favored his opponents, and by every normal measure of war plans. The coming battle should result in terrible defeat. Yet something deep within him remained sure that winning was possible. Perhaps it was a feeling, perhaps it was desperate hope, but he felt certain that his cause was right, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could. And they had eyes to see the huge force set against them. Fear moved through their ranks like a sickness. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with bad feelings spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their spirit was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be beaten, regardless of any other factors. Skill, better weapons, even number advantage means nothing when soldiers have already given up in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that belief. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious place that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless fighters had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in sincere prayer, asking for God's blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and took out a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the gathered ranks. "We have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself show our future. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are meant to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with excitement. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment. This one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its path as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer exploded from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been sad and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and hugged each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was sure. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce drive and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a clear victory, beating forces much larger than their own and securing a win that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his helper approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the helper said, "what an amazing thing. The coin showed our true future just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decided." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and took out the coin, holding it so his helper could look at it closely. "No one can change destiny." The helper looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the deep truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what happens? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all outside circumstances, we have huge power over the inside conditions that decide how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something deep about human thinking and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their number disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, drive, and fighting spirit could overcome bigger numbers when those qualities were truly present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply trick his troops through lies. He created the conditions that allowed their natural bravery and strength to come out. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are decided, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the mental conditions that allowed their best qualities to show. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of outside circumstances. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more powerful than their thoughts about their number disadvantage. He worked with the reality of thinking rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mindset, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on blocks rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin? A practice or view that constantly points you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances. The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are comes with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of mind itself, when we approach situations with real confidence, clarity, and promise. We often discover abilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create inside conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have huge influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Our next story shows the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant fighting between rival groups, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his friends fell around him and defeat became certain, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield. His armor taken, his weapons taken. That evening, they threw him into a dark, small prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with scary possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the ways of war. First would come the questions designed to get information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would turn to pain. Hot iron, bamboo pieces under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in quiet tones by other warriors. And when they had taken what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the death. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so hard he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and fast. Sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind made increasingly clear pictures of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this pain. The warrior walked his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of coming doom that played repeatedly in his mind, like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his sadness, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master was sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real. It is a trick. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind fought these words. How could tomorrow be a trick when the threats were so solid, so sure? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to go deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human fighting. In this moment, he was not being hurt. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so huge moments before showed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a deep peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady beat. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more tight than the stone walls around him, the prison of worried thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom shows the deep truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we hurt ourselves with endless scenes about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds grew as survival tools, constantly scanning for threats and planning for safety. While this ability serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental pictures for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from clear imaginings of future scenes that may never happen? The talk you're worried about, the medical test results you're waiting for, the hard conversation you need to have. These situations exist mostly in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and getting ready have their place, but when they turn into non-stop worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to change, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully guess or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or get worse. But change teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captives would show mercy. Perhaps talks would get his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone. The future is not yet here. And there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention usually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we grow what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than decided anxiety. When we truly live in the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never showed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention changed his entire experience. The same cell, the same unsure future. But by returning to present moment awareness, suffering turned into peace. This change is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, As you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the feeling of the air are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not stay in the past. Do not dream of the future. Focus the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison, and our own. Now let us explore a Zen story about the true nature of spiritual truth. This is the meeting between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his love to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who cared only with wealth and land, this emperor had spent years studying holy books, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master, whose understanding went beyond normal knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invite. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's famous wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with excitement. The emperor had prepared fancy questions that would show both his love and smart grasp of Buddhist ideas. Surely, such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his standing humble yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Honored master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the huge hall, decorated with precious statues and holy signs. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and given my life to understanding the holy path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist teaching?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a deep talk that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would explain on the Four Noble Truths, or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes, with a look that seemed to see through all masks. His answer came quietly. Big empty space and not a trace of holiness. Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had heard wrong. Where was the fancy explanation of Buddhist world? Where were the mentions to holy books and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and sadness, "then who or what are you? If there is no holy truth to get, what makes you a master?" The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent gathering spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a religious Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully built self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. "I do not know." With these three simple words, the master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had gathered. The master left as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in thinking silence. As the Buddha saw, those who think they know don't know. Those who know they don't know, know. This strange teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with gathering knowledge, but with recognizing the limits of thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grabbing. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in getting enough holy knowledge. But true truth cannot be owned or described in normal terms. The master's statement of big empty space points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, separate way our thoughts assume. Everything comes connected without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to live. When the master says there is not a trace of holiness, he's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that goes beyond two-sided thinking, separating holy from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might light up your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, group, and repeat them. Yet each time we grab, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with true awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless, but they had become blocks to direct recognition of what was always present. The master's I do not know represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains open to what is actually happening, rather than filtering through pre-ideas. From this mind, appropriate action comes without thinking interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting I don't know feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this admitting becomes a doorway to fresh seeing. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing? The space that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts. As the Buddha taught, in the sky there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The big empty space the master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment exactly as it is lacking nothing. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the deep difference between passive giving up and active kindness. This is the story of the lion and the fox. In a land where no rain had fallen for many months, and both humans and animals struggled to find food, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual wanting. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many ways to wealth, various jobs, different plans, numerous ideas. Yet nothing had brought him the safety and happiness he sought. His frustration grew as his supplies ran low and his situation became increasingly shaky. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing. He thought some spiritual rule that once understood will unlock the doors to plenty and peace. One night, after hours of strong prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek. The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such power, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple food and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he walked among tall trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some showing that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and sweet with wild flowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to enjoy the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, tiredness forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth rock, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded corner nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space. But this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars. Yet the animal appeared calm and well-fed rather than starving or upset as he would have expected. How strange, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or look for food manage to live in the wild? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he hid himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps coming through the brush. A huge lion came into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any obvious reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox, and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. Ah, he thought silently, now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and try and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive. Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for heaven to supply his needs, as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores gone, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet, he kept his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be proven right by divine help. 2 weeks into this test, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his idea, the man had another clear dream. The same strong voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again, but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with meanness, but with kind clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The story points us toward understanding the deep difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake doing nothing for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with kind action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding. The belief that faith means waiting for outside forces to solve our problems. But true spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which kindness flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the group you long for, to start the project you've dreamed of, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom shows the difference between victim thinking and co-creator thinking. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care and received it through the lion's giving. But humans possess abilities the fox lacks. Smarts, creativity, the ability to plan and provide, not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't free us from worldly responsibility, but changes how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of connection that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control. Sickness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like abilities, skills, resources, energy, or chances that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by many things. This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-focus to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's change from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to true Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we grow what's called the helper ideal, the wish to work for the freedom of all beings rather than seeking only our own comfort and safety. This doesn't mean we ignore our real needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also light your path." Often the success and happiness we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through giving ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to check our reasons for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement? Or are we growing wisdom and kindness to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine giving? Or are we asking how we can become tools of giving for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not blame. The man's first misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and abilities you've been given, can you sense how they might be meant not just for your own safety, but for the welfare of others? Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of kindness that arises when we recognize our basic connection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that try to hold it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery, where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a loved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily habit of walking with his loyal dog. The animal's joy was catching, running ahead to bring back sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was smart, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex ideas. Yet this very smartness had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist books, the more opposites he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating blocks rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his upset. "Master, I struggle with opposites in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature, some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that book smarts could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a math problem. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only signs. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager excitement. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the glowing ball and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger pointing clearly toward the sky body. The dog's response was immediate and expected, his eyes fixed intently on the teacher's pointing finger. Following its movement with focused attention, he typically reserved for thrown sticks, the animal's entire being focused on the pointing finger, completely missing the moon hanging beautifully above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student watched the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only signs. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally. Regardless of whether anyone pointed at it, the truth was, like that moon, present and bright, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha saw, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after watching and thinking, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is good for the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. This teaching addresses the exact confusion that bothered the bright student, mistaking ideas about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how book understanding, while valuable, can become a wall when we rely on it only. The student's bright mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings. But analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog focused on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and ideas that he missed the reality they tried to show. Why do we become trapped in book understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into groups. But ultimate truth goes beyond these two-sided differences. It cannot be captured in ideas any more than the moon can be held in a picture. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the annoying recognition that our usual ways of knowing are not enough for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same unspeakable reality. Like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern shows in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation ways, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes a problem when we mistake gathering of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the land. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy taking pictures that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists before all concepts and groups. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or book understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our book knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be thrown away once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you meet the sure complexity of modern life, can you tell between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own natural wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your freedom with hard work. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they show. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of identity and the mystery of mind itself. This is the tale of Chuang Tzu and the butterfly. The ancient wise man, Chuang Tzu, lived simply, spending his days in quiet thinking of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of existence. He was known for his deep insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface, looks that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuang Tzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the smell of spring blossoms created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his mind gradually shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious world of dreams. In his dream, something amazing happened. Chuang Tzu found himself turned into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He fluttered gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and feeling. There was no memory of being a thinker, no awareness of human concerns or book pursuits. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through strange eyes, flying by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuang Tzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically fill human minds. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly life with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the change had happened, Chuang Tzu woke up. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his thinker's mind immediately active with questions and thoughts. The bright dream began to fade as waking mind came back. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuang Tzu found himself puzzled by a deep question that challenged everything he thought he knew about identity and reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the lingering sensation of flight, and thought about the meaning of what had just occurred. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely fun guessing. It pointed to something fundamental about the nature of mind and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and true while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us all. Conditioned existence is changing. Work out your freedom with hard work. This ancient teaching shows the fluid nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of mind represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact all states of mind, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing things arising in the vast space of awareness. Chuang Tzu's question challenges our basic assumptions about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely true and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally true and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false idea? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of mind. Are you the same you when you're dreaming as when you're awake? What about when you're deeply absorbed in an activity or in deep meditation or in moments of creative flow, when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in mind, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they're not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they're not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they're not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something deep about the nature of change and possibility. If Chuang Tzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream mind, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around our identity? How solid are the limits we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Chuang Tzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent separate existence. They are temporary forms in the field of mind, each real while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of identity. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and ideas that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking mind and the dream state, can you remember Chuang Tzu's deep question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you're experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, the awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and free. As the Buddha observed, everything is changing. Strive on with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure power for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stone-cutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stone-cutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the mines, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a simple hut with few things, the stone-cutter wanted nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete, the rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the happiness of honest work. His heart held not a care in the world. One day he was called to work on the grand house of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the greatness before him. Stone columns reached toward the sky. Gardens spread in perfect balance. For the first time in his life, the stone-cutter felt the sharp pang of wanting pierce his happiness. If only I were rich, he sighed. Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and hard work as I do now. To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. From now on, anything you want will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his simple hut replaced by a house as great as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he left his tools and began enjoying the rich life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his fancy window, he saw the king's royal parade passing by. The king sat in cool shade, surrounded by noble men and servants, appearing calm and powerful above the common heat. How I wish I were a king myself, he thought, and immediately found himself resting in silk pillows within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat came through relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. I wished to be a cloud, and so he became a massive storm cloud, enjoying his power to block the sun. But as he turned into falling rain, he met a huge rock that blocked his path completely, a mere rock more powerful than I. I wished to be a rock. Suddenly he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away, a tiny creature more powerful than me. I want to be a man again. And so he found himself once more a stone cutter climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned richer than before because he had learned to be happy with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom shows the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the plenty already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next change? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stone-cutter's journey reveals the uselessness of seeking happiness through outside circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. I'll be happy when I get moved up only to discover new stresses. I'll be content with more money only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement shows the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This puzzle points to the heart of happiness, the ability to fully accept what is while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final change wasn't into something greater, but into thanks for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely changed. Happiness isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you try with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest change available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the built-in completeness of what we already are. Our next story shows the difference between skill mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions. His dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His skill became flawless, his aim so exact that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning bow contests one after another. Each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flushed with success and perhaps a bit drunk by his own fame, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man famous not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. "I will challenge this old master," the young man thought, "and when I beat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land." He found the master's simple house and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your fame with the bow. I challenge you to show whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet fun, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his show. He picked a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practice exactness, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without stopping, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have done it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, pointing toward his perfect show. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly. "Let us find a better place for this show." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no place could lower his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more dangerous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep crack. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow. The gap opened like a hungry mouth. The slightest wrong step would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this dangerous bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it dipped slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the crack. Drawing his bow with the same casual exactness he might use in his own garden, The master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the empty space and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but done under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and pointed toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the gap and looked down into the seemingly bottomless hole. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs shook beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with kind understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom shows the difference between mastery of skill and mastery of the mind that employs the skill. Why do we so often mistake technical skill for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on outside accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limits when facing uncertainty, danger, or real challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully grown abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on outside circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of skill. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we grow what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of outside conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully, even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's show wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the deep difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine calmness. Zen master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on cliffs. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and abilities you've developed, can you tell between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us chaos is built into all things, Strive on with hard work. Life is the bridge over the gap. Uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our balance no matter where we find ourselves standing. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a far-off mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with huge intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholar-like exactness, memorizing verses and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often talked about his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist ideas. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into puzzle the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's room. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Honored master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have met a teaching that I cannot understand. Could you please show its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful exactness, explaining his confusion and the various ideas he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally exploded into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with joy, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely confused. This was not the response he had expected, where he expected deep wisdom and careful explanation. He found only laughter. The master's fun seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing sadness. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's strange laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals. His meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless times. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual question been met with such puzzling fun? Other monks noticed his upset state, but his responses to their concerns were unclear and troubled. He felt ashamed, confused, and increasingly upset. Had the master been making fun of his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the pain any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days, I have been deeply bothered by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He motioned for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Honored sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have given up worldly pleasures and chased wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel bothered, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown? At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mean. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma showing itself through puzzle. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh, first quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful silliness of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others show the state of our own minds. Why do we become bothered when others show joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's upset stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our connection with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be passed. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, serious explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways, a master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider silly. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our pre-ideas? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. The master's laughter was not lowering the Dharma, but celebrating its endless joy. A joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Now let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual passing. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the busy capital city where merchants haggled in crowded markets and scholars debated in tea houses, the famous Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his deep insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to leave for his next place, carefully folding his few possessions into a travelling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone used to moving in high circles, likely a helper or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Honoured master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have kept him today. Would you consider delaying your leaving by 1 day so that he might have the honour of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. Of course, he replied simply, "I shall remain 1 more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached, but instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed. Matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused clearly, hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly. If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the deep impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with typical simplicity and directness. This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to pass through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be. Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, showing the very teaching he had just said. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This deep truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by someone else. Spiritual awakening cannot be passed second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and passed through go-betweens? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study, because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind. Right now, Zen Master Dogen taught to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual passing requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through close investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or passed because we are expressions of it. Banki's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible, or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own freedom with hard work. The path to freedom cannot be walked by someone else. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been, but perhaps never clearly seen. Tonight, as we draw our time together to a peaceful conclusion, do you notice how the peace you've discovered feels less like something you've gotten and more like something you've remembered? Can you sense that the deep calm you've encountered tonight doesn't belong to these tales alone, but exists as a constant presence within your own being, patiently waiting for your attention? The Buddha reminded us that better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. In the spirit of this wisdom, recognize that peace and understanding don't require perfect conditions or extraordinary experiences, but flourish naturally from your own inner landscape, available in each breathing moment. Through tonight's exploration, every narrative has woven together a timeless understanding, consistently revealing the liberating truth that struggle diminishes when we loosen our hold. That genuine freedom flows effortlessly when we let go of our need to control. And that lasting happiness springs from seeing reality clearly beyond our habitual patterns and automatic responses. Even when your thoughts wander, even when tension creeps back in, the insights you've gathered tonight have taken root in the depths of your being, ready to nourish you whenever you call upon them. Reflect as you settle into rest that these enduring teachings have revealed not some far-off destination, but a way of living with complete presence in this very moment, in the stillness that surrounds you now. Notice how deeply your view has expanded, how effortlessly your breathing has deepened, and how peacefully your mind settles, undisturbed and open. These lessons remind us that authentic understanding isn't concealed in remote monasteries or buried within ancient manuscripts. It radiates clearly and unmistakably through the beautiful simplicity of conscious presence. Tonight, you've touched that reality, a reality that emerges naturally when we simply stop and truly listen. as you transition from this serene space back into the rhythm of everyday life. Take with you not merely the stories you've heard, but the deep stillness and clarity they've awakened in you. May this peace remain your faithful friend, guiding you through moments of joy and periods of difficulty with equal grace. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Sleep well.